Hello and welcome back to Friday Minis. Today we're going to talk about a camera related term, and that is the term crop factor. This term is also known as format factor and essentially is a measurement of your sensor size. Now, obviously in photography, the bigger the sensor the better. Among other things, you get better light sensitivity, you get nicer shallow depth of field effects. So yeah, the bigger the sensor the better. But well, that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're going to talk about the actual crop factor, and that is the number that measures how big or small a sensor is. Now, it is important to note that crop factor is actually a relative measurement. It is relative to the 35mm sensor, also known as the full frame sensor, and that is essentially thought of as a 1 times crop factor, even though I don't know if people actually use that term. They normally just say full frame. Now, the reason why this is termed as a crop factor is because you can imagine a smaller sensor as taking a full frame sensor and then cropping out the sides so that you have a smaller sensor in the center. In terms of the image you get, that is actually the case. With the same lens and imagine the same camera body, even though that's normally not how things work, having a full frame sensor will actually capture a wider range than a cropped sensor. Now, the crop factor is actually similar to zooming. It's not exactly the same, but in terms of framing, you can think of it as an extremely similar concept. Essentially, if you have 2 cameras side by side, one with a crop sensor and one without, in order to get the same framing, you're gonna have to zoom in slightly on the camera with the larger sensor. Which is why the amount of zoom, which in technical terms is called the focal length, can also be calculated by factoring in the crop factor. For example, if I'm using a camera with a crop sensor at 1.5 times, and then with that camera I actually zoom into a 20mm focal length, essentially I can actually represent the amount of zoom I have in terms of what I would see with a full frame camera. And to do that, I simply take the crop factor, that is 1.5, and multiply it by the focal length I have, that is 20mm. The framing I get is actually equivalent to having a full frame camera zoomed in to a 30mm focal length. And that is basically how you calculate your framing based on the size of a sensor and how zoomed in you are. Just to furnish you with an additional example right before we go. Now, I'm actually shooting this on a bridge camera right now. It is completely zoomed out, and this lens, when completely zoomed out, has a focal length of 4mm. Now, if you actually play with lenses that go into DSLRs, you will realize that 4mm is a number you never hear. 4mm actually refers to an extremely wide angle. But because this is a bridge camera and the sensor is extremely tiny, it has a crop factor of 5 point something. So to get the full frame equivalent of how much you are actually seeing right now, you've got to take the 5 point something and multiply that by the 4mm. And as a result, you see that, hey, this isn't as wide as it sounds after all. So yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for this episode of Friday Minis. I hope you learned something today. Thank you very much for watching. You're watching 0612 TV. Hello, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, remember that I appreciate every like, favorite and comment you give me. If you'd like to see more from me in the future, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And for more updates outside of YouTube, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at 0612TV. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.